David Koppe, great to have you. How are you doing today?
Very good, thanks. Good, great to be here. Nice to spend some time with you.
Likewise, likewise. Well, look, for the benefit of the audience today, would love to just hear a little bit of a background on you, how you got into business value. I know you cut your teeth at BMC Software, one of the premium names in the whole value consulting universe. But yeah, I'd love a little bit on your background, then we'll jump right into it.
I've been in technology for more years than I care to share, but I've spent probably the last 18 years or so on the vendor side. I started off on the vendor side, then I went to GE for 13 years as a technology director, and then moved back over to the vendor side. Always been on the pre-sales side. I was a software engineer for many years, and made a transition into the value selling world around 2018, 19, while I was at MongoDB. But I've been familiar with the value consulting, value engineering role, as you said, since I was at BMC, who had a very, very mature practice. But actually, really, even before that, at BladeLogic, where there wasn't necessarily a value practice, but value selling was absolutely a key part of the culture there. So, as I said, transitioned into the value consulting, value engineering role while I was at MongoDB, and been in that role ever since.
And so you, having come from BladeLogic, you transitioned to BMC through the acquisition.
Yeah, I was at BladeLogic about 9 months, and then got acquired by BMC. And then I stayed there, I think I was at the two for about 9 years.
There has a bit of a folklore kind of theme there, right? Because a lot of people talk about that John McMahon, BladeLogic acquisition by BMC, and then BMC really, was it the value selling expertise and practice from BladeLogic then got infused into BMC Software?
Certainly the value selling mindset, yes, absolutely. There was almost, from a sales perspective, it was almost a reverse acquisition. The sales leadership, sales team from BladeLogic really was brought into BMC to kind of reinvigorate the selling motion, and all of the command of the message, and negative consequences, positive business outcomes, how we do it better, metrics, etc. That was all driven across BMC by that sort of that BladeLogic sales leadership.
All these scenes from the qualified sales leader are just popping into my head now.
Exactly.
How much of the likeness of that book did you live?
Most of it. A couple of people have made some comments about, this person in that book is actually that person, right?
Yes.
And I'm reading it, I'm going, oh yeah, okay. So
we've
not
decrypted
divulging
that
any
within
details,
our business.
but yeah, but I mean, a lot of those, a lot of the scenarios in that book, clearly resonated because I've been at BladeLogic, BMC, MongoDB, even. Where a lot of that culture was very, very, very prevalent, and then a lot of the reason for each of those companies' success along the years.
It's a bit of the stuff of legends, right? Because a lot of those people have then gone on to other companies and built tremendous value at those organizations like MongoDB, Splunk, Fuse, Sprinkler.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and almost an endless list. I still frequently come across, I'm looking at someone and I'm interviewing someone for a potential role on my team, and they mention a sales leader. I'm like, oh, I know that person, and I think that's really a testament to the whole idea and the whole practice, right? It's not just a way of selling. It's been an incredibly powerful way of selling for several decades, and proof's in the pudding, right? There's a lot of people who've gone on to have incredibly, not just successful sales careers, but sales leadership careers based on that.
Have you seen that value selling, the methodology of value selling, have an impact beyond the GTM team? Because in a lot of the conversations that I have with peers, many of your peers in the industry, it feels like there is a natural reorientation of a business based on the work that the team, the business value consulting team, the value selling team do in identifying the sources of value of a business and the organization.
Mm-hmm. I think that's absolutely critical. It is not just a go-to-market practice. And I think that's why I prefer the term value engineering to value consulting. Although after I repeatedly get hit up on LinkedIn with people offering me software developers, I realize the word engineering maybe isn't the right term. So value office, value practice, I think is a good way of describing it, because value consulting to me, and again, probably from the BMC world, very much sounds like there's a team of people who have a core skill. You bring them into a sales opportunity. They engage with the customer. They do some interviews. They deliver a work product, an artifact, and then they move on. Right. That to me is what value consulting brings to mind. And that's really not the reality anymore, because it's fine to do that. And I think a lot of the transition, we'll probably get into a lot of this, is, in the BMC world, it was very much a perpetual license. So there was a very significant upfront investment from the customer in the product. So obviously some sort of business case was pretty critical when customers running a 6, maybe 7, or maybe even 8-figure check. They're going to need to have some pretty solid financial discipline. So having that expertise on the pre-sale side to work through that initial investment for the customer is really, really critical. But then if you're sort of from the vendor mindset, the customer's got some skin in the game now, right? They're not just going to spend $1 million on your product and then a year later say, it's not quite working the way we want, let's go do something different. They're pretty much on the hook for a few years there of maintenance, right? And the switching cost was a lot higher. Now that's very much different. So if you put all your time into that initial transaction and forget about whether the customer is actually getting the value you said they would, you're putting yourself at risk, because, it's great to do that when you get $1 million, $2 million deal out of it. But if you get a 40, 50, 60K transaction and then the customer switches in a year, that's not a good business model. So I think infusing that value mindset initially into customer success, right, is key, because in a subscription, SaaS type model, it's the renewals and growth where you actually make your money, not that initial land. But then also just really through marketing, enablement, it's the value selling, and that value mindset needs to infuse across the business so that everybody's singing from the same hymn sheet to really be successful.
I love that distinction between value consulting and value engineering. And I always, from up until you said it, it was always synonymous to me, just based on people's roles. In some places call it consulting, other places call it engineering, other places call it management. But actually, if you think about it from the conceptually, what value engineering is, it's engineering the value across the whole organization. Mm-hmm. And it should, to a degree, be a hub around a series of different spokes where the product alignment, marketing alignment, sales alignment, financial alignment, everything should align towards the main value drivers of that organization. And if you get it right, it's a very powerful sequence, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things that drew me to Systig, is because that's exactly how, that was the vision for the value practice, where it actually wasn't even necessarily all reporting to me as the value engineering leader. There was kind of a corresponding role on the product marketing side who would sort of handle that. What's the customer facing messaging? What's our go-to-market messaging? But then align with my team, which is the customer-facing team, who's sort of seeing this on a day-to-day basis, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work, understanding how, something pretty important, how do customers view value? We know how we view value, but how do customers view value? That would be kind of nice to know, right? And that's why I think the customer success side is equally important, because honestly, as a value engineer, I learn more out of a sort of a value realization or an existing customer conversation than I do from working with a prospect. Because Absolutely. Now I'm hearing, like, what do you think the value is, right? That'd be good to know, right? So I think having those three spokes are really important. And enablement was the other piece, because the reality now, at a BMC, again, using that as a reference model, there was a large team of value consultants, and pretty much any significant size deal would have some sort of value consultant engaged. That's not the case anymore, because when you're doing, your average sales price is whatever it is at a growing company, 50K, 100K, 150K, you're not throwing 7 or 8 different resources at that for weeks or months on end. The economics don't work, right? So you've got to really think about scale. And okay, I've got this team. I recognize my team here will only ever be tiny, even compared to SEs. So how do I use those resources to greatest effect? So self-service and driving that value mentality into the sales team and the SE team is a key part of the success as well, because the value team can't do everything. You've got to drive and enable a lot of that activity just natively within the go-to-market, the sales team and the customer success team.
I can imagine a fair part of that job is also cultural, having that cultural mindset of value as that central hub. So you mentioned the term pre-sales, and it may sound very obvious to you given your background, the work that you do. A lot of companies that we work with will define certain activities in pre-sales, but there's a lot of companies out there who will hear that and say, "What's pre-sales? I do sales." Would love to hear from you. How do you define the pre-sales process, and how does it then link up with the value selling and value engineering and then delivery side?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I think that you mentioned something, and I think it's key to stress that. I do sales, right? Everybody in pre-sales does sales, right? We all do sales, right? Everybody at the company is trying to, in some way, contribute to sales, because that's why we're there. Generally, I use pre-sales as it's the typical combination of there's a salesperson who ultimately owns the number, owns the relationship with the customer, owns the some of the contractual relationships, but then they'll have a technical counterpart, software engineer, solutions engineer, software architect. There's a lot of different names for it, and they're there to provide that technical support. So, in some companies, if the salesperson can do everything and do the demos and everything, that's great. But typically, you need somebody who's got much more of a technical background to support them. And, the customers, you're going to be working with fairly technical people at the customer. So when they start getting into, specific platforms, specific use cases, specific integrations, you need somebody with a technical background to be able to handle that. And it's really important for that person to recognize that they're in sales as well. Right, the most successful SEs are not just extremely technical; they're also salespeople. Because Sure. The reality is, when you're talking to a customer, I found this as an SE, and it's almost a cliche. Like, the salesperson could say something, and then I could say the same thing, potentially even using the same words, and the customer's reaction will be totally different. They look at the salesperson and say, "Okay," and then they hear me and say, "Oh, okay," because it's. And that's a key part of the role, right? You have to build that trust. You don't just get it. Cool. It's a lot easier for a technical person to have that trust than a salesperson, just because of the nature. It
also lets people's guard down, right? When you're oftentimes when you know you're being sold to, and for lack of a better term, when you're speaking to a salesperson, your guard will be up because you're never quite sure. Why are you asking me this information? Discovery, which is always a little bit of it's a song and dance. It's you're leading the witness, as John McMahon says. You have to build trust. And sometimes people feel a little bit more, depending on the persona, but sometimes they feel a little bit more comfortable with somebody who's more technical because they feel like the questions may come from a more authentic and genuine foundation of curiosity versus maybe just sales to try to identify how much somebody can extract, right?
Exactly, yeah. And it's funny because I was an SC for many, many years. I played Logic and BMC. And then I transitioned into a sales role, product account manager for a certain portion of BMC's products. And I wasn't actually very good at it. So I just said, no, forget that. I'll go back to what I'm good at. But in that role, I actually consciously found myself, like, the customer would ask a question or something, and I would deliberately not answer, even though I could. And I would turn to my SE and say, can you pick that one up? Because I knew it would be better coming from that person rather than myself. And I think, so that to me is pre-sales. It's the sales and the technical sales role working together. And I think a lot of the key to the success of any software company is working those two roles out. Do you pair people up? Is it a 1-to-1 ratio? Does that SE support multiple salespeople? How much of the salesperson does the SE own? Right, they can be purely a supporting role, and ultimately the software, the salesperson owns it, or it can be very much a team, a partnership, and that's sort of the core of the role. And then I think value engineering comes in, and that's another key question: is when does value engineering come in? When does this software company that's probably growing, probably, especially these days, doesn't have a lot of spare headcount to throw at hiring people? When do you actually hire a value team? Do you hire a value team? Do you need a value team? How big does a value team need to be? Right? I view my role as, hey, I came into to Sysdig as an individual contributor because I wanted to be in the trenches, working with salespeople, with SEs, seeing what happened with customers and where we could help the most. And we're very much a supporting role in helping to document the easiest way to describe it is document the business case, right? Customer writes a check for X, they're going to get Y in value. Understand what value do they care about and work with them to approximate what that value is. The way I always think of it is, you've worked with a bunch of technical people who understand the problem and realize that we're the best solution, but you put the proposal on the desk of a CFO who, in our case, doesn't understand cloud security, doesn't know what cybersecurity really is, doesn't know who Sysdig is, and all they know is they're going to be writing a check for something. And when they say, what do I get for this? Answering with a bunch of use cases is not the answer. There's got to be some sort of business response. Well, we have an existing tool that's a lot more expensive, so we're cutting costs. Great. This will help us maybe avoid growing the security team by 3x as we're currently projecting based on our business growth, because Sysdig can help us prioritize and reduce the manual overhead in keeping ourselves secure. Whatever that looks like, we can innovate more quickly because we're not going to be as much of a drag on developers fixing vulnerability. Whatever that looks like, that's the purpose of the value engineer. And the more you can infuse that into the sales and SE teams, the better. I always tell people, look, don't feel like you have to bring me into an opportunity. If I can give you the content and the material and the process to do that yourselves, everybody wins. I have absolutely no need to touch every opportunity. I want to enable the sales and SE teams to have this value conversation themselves organically.
I would imagine if they do their job right, or if value engineering does it's ultimately coaching the champion and positioning them into a very strong, at least maybe not necessarily decision maker, but a very strong analytical presenter of information of that business case, right? We all, the business case is ultimately the champion's, it's not ours. It's our job to prepare it for them in the best possible way so they can then take it to their economic buyer and make that case. So maybe there's a kind of pseudo double meaning for consulting there, where you are also guiding your champion with the right tools to speak the language of their economic buyer.
Absolutely, yeah. So I typically, the way I like to see our team engage is we'll obviously have a prep call with the internal sales team, but I like to have like a 30-minute call with our champion. And what I'll do in that call is I'll present our point of view, like this is how we view value. It's not just about money, right? And especially in the security world, you're not necessarily looking to cut costs, right? Not many CISOs would say, my goal this year is to cut costs. Your goal is where you can cut costs, that's great. Your role as a CISO is to improve your company's security profile and reduce risk, right? So there's a lot of other ways of viewing value. Yes, hard costs. Yes, productivity. Yes, obviously risk. How does this fit into our innovation and development cycles and things like that? So you, as a leader in a space, you should have a point of view to present to your champion and give some examples and so on. And what I'm looking to do there is say, hey, look, this is how we view value. These are the different avenues we can take. But what about what I just said resonates with you, right? Because ultimately, it's not my business case, it's yours, right? If you're buying my software, you need to go justify the expenditure. So I kind of set this table of, hey, these are some ways we can approach it, but then see what resonates and then ultimately pick up on, what they view their business case would be. And a lot of times, depending on the level of the organization you're talking to, if you're more at sort of the practitioner level or the first line manager level, they may not actually know how they need to justify buying a piece of software, right? They may purely be thinking about use cases and technical criteria, which is important, obviously. But in many ways, you're actually helping that person kind of learn how to justify this thing that they know they need, but not just in a technical way. And getting that collaboration, getting them to lean in, teaching them how to justify this investment internally,
and ultimately maybe even how to buy your service better, right? How to make sure that how they're buying, what they're buying is the most effective or efficient version of a solution that they could possibly have, right? And that, I guess, comes with trust.
Yeah, I think that's also key because, one of the things I always like to keep in mind is that while I'm trying to build a business case, I'm actually trying to build a business case for the company that I work for, not our competitors, right? So part of the sort of that value structure needs to be oriented around what your differentiation is. What are the things that you do better, where you deliver more value versus the areas that you either don't deliver value in, or maybe you're not as effective, right? Not every company in the world is 100% effective at everything that they try to do, right?
It's the second why, right?
The second why, yeah. Why us? Yeah. And part of that is not to sort of manipulate the customer into, look over here, don't look over there. You're trying to prioritize, and I think this is another key area of value is if you can focus on and find out what the customer perceives value as, maybe this isn't the right opportunity, right? If they're looking to buy something that does X and you do Y, it's really good to find that out early. As I think John McCann might have said, or certainly somebody in that sales leadership role, the best place to finish in sales is first. The second best place to finish is last. The worst place to finish is second. Because if you finish second, that means you've spent a whole load of resources for absolutely nothing for it. And value can play a massive role in that. Because ultimately, the technical qualification is very important, obviously. If there's something that we don't do that is a must-have for the customer, okay, let's walk away. Or, see, is it on the roadmap, or at least shine a light on it and make an adult decision. But, part of value to me is getting to the point of, does the customer need to spend money on solving this problem right now? Or is it a year from now problem, right?
Yeah, and that qualification is so important to forecasting.
Yeah, because the last thing you want to do is spend a whole bunch of time on sales qualification, demos, etc. Even worse than doing a POV, where you're spending your own company's resources to run your platform for them, and a whole bunch of product and engineering and SE resources to make it work and show them that it works. And then they say, "Yeah, that was nice. We're not going to buy." That's a horrible outcome, honestly, for everybody. And value can play a really, really important role in just firming up the financials of the transaction. The technical side, yes, that's important as well, obviously, but the financial side is really, really key.
So imagine you're starting at a new company, and it's a relatively it's a growing company. Imagine they've got a sales team of 50 people, GTM team generally 50 people. They've never done value selling before, and you want to introduce the core principles of value selling, right? If you were to strip it down to its core principles and activities, how would you structure that? How would you layer it in?
So the way I typically layer it, the way I typically present it is, I try to kind of get everybody's attention up front, and I've kind of used this in a couple of different places. I'll sort of make a presentation. I'll say, guess what? Breaking news: we don't sell technology, and you get really funny looks because people are saying, "Who is this guy? He works for a software company saying we don't sell technology. What the hell's wrong with him?" Right? And you kind of pause a little bit and say, "We don't sell technology. We make technology, but what we sell is the value that technology delivers to a customer. That's what the customer's buying. They're not buying the bits and bytes of the product and the platform. They're buying the things they can accomplish with that." Right? That's what they're actually buying. That's what they're spending money on. Ultimately, that's kind of the difference between an open source technology, which you just download and use, and a technology that you're actually investing resources in. So then you say, okay, well, what does value mean? And then I think what I generally do is try and dig into obviously money. If we're a cheaper solution than a competitor, that's great. Expand it into the TCO of solving a problem, right? You've got software you buy. You've maybe even got, maybe you run something on your own infrastructure. So there's the infrastructure cost. There's the people time. You somehow quantify the negative consequences of the way they're currently doing it, whether it's, lost revenue. Hey, we've lost $50,000 of revenue because we couldn't demonstrate SOC 2 compliance. Okay. And there's another $250,000 of revenue at risk because of that. Okay. Well, there's some quantification. That's the value that you're delivering. Then I think you kind of map that into, that's the pain that they're currently measuring. that they're currently experiencing. You're quantifying the sort of the TCO of solving that pain. And then the other perspective that I always try to bring is a business case is essentially kind of a comparison of two alternate views of the future. One where maybe you keep doing the things the way you are, or you solve your problem a different way. And then the other is you solve your problem with us, right? And sort of documenting all of those different elements of value, cost, productivity, risk, compliance, revenue in those two terms, because it is really important to make sure that those two visions of the future are as close apples to apples as possible. And, bring that to the table as sort of a structured conversation around, what are the value add drivers? And you need to customize that to the specific company you're at, right? If you're selling a piece of hardware that's got a much lower TCO than an existing player, then that's fairly straightforward, right? You've got to dig into documenting what that TCO is, etc. One of the things I found since I'm in security is that's actually a pretty complicated question because, as you said before, most security leaders are probably not, their first priority is not necessarily cutting cost. They're looking to reduce risk. And how do you quantify that? That's where it gets interesting.
So. That's very challenging because it's all hypothetical, right? And ultimately, a business case is a hypothesis. It's a hypothesis until you actually get, the rubber meets the road, so to speak, and you actually start to deliver. And only then can you match it up or review based on the baseline that both parties kind of agreed would be the business case. But I love the way that you defined what a business case is. It's two different views of the future. It's one with us, one without us, or one with us, one versus a competitor, or two different scenarios, or even more in those scenarios.
Yep.
From our perspective, our goal is to get people to sell using business cases because we believe that in order to do that, you're helping the seller sell better, you're helping the buyer buy better. If both parties are working together on a business case, and ultimately you should reach what we call market symbiosis, right? Mm-hmm. There's a real alignment of value. But it takes time for the world to see it that way.
That's right. And actually the other, I'm glad you mentioned that, because the other thing that I introduce when I'm in a new organization is, guess what, folks? There's always a business case. No company in the history of companies has bought something without a business case. Now, the question is, do we know what it is? And if we don't, that's a massive risk for a deal. So wouldn't it be better if we at least know what that business case is, and if we can help influence it and help the customer build it? Because there always is a business case. I mean, maybe a few years ago when, before the economy was challenged and before the pullback in tech, maybe you could get away without a business case, especially in something like security. Security, we need it, it's a risk. Somebody's going to hack us. Let's buy more stuff. Not anymore. Certainly in this day and age for the foreseeable future, it's always a business case. So wouldn't it be better if we knew what it was and helped collaborate on it?
That's such an interesting perspective on it, which is it's almost taking it in reverse. Like the business case is there. It's for us to uncover actually what is the optimum one for that organization, right? Yeah. They may not know, we may not know, but together we'll figure out what that business case is, because without it, no decision is going to be made, right? Somebody up there in the EB circle needs something to review to believe in that business case. Mm-hmm. Really interesting. Sure. Okay, I have to ask this question because it's the world that we live in and the days that we live in. So, you know how Mark Andreessen said about 10 years ago or a bit more, software is eating the world? AI today is eating software. How do you see the role of AI in the business value consulting, value management, value engineering space? Where do you see it supporting? Where do you see it not supporting? It would be good to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've thought of the Gartner hype cycle a lot in the last year or so. The peak of inflated expectations and the trough of disillusionment. I think we're moving along that at a rapid pace. I mean, I think, look, AI is absolutely one of the most transformational technologies that we have in technology at the moment, and maybe for many decades, since many decades. But I think ultimately it is a technology, and how do we use that technology, right? I think, I heard a quote. I'm not 100% sure what the quote is, so I'm not going to try and attribute it to someone unless I firm that up. But it's that with new technologies, people tend to overestimate the short-term impact and underestimate the long-term impact. And I think what AI generally is it's a way of helping humans make better decisions, right? It helps you do make better decisions is probably sort of the best way to describe it. So if I'm, writing an email, I can use AI to help me write that email more effectively, help me accomplish that task more effectively. And I think that's the role it provides. I think in some cases, can AI fully automate some process or task? Yes. But I think there always needs to be some sort of human oversight of it, right? We've seen issues where, automated sort of credit approval, if you haven't trained the model properly, you can get some unfortunate consequences on that, right? So there's always human interaction in it, right? Humans decide how to train the model, what data to train the model on, how they're going to use the technology in a particular business process. So there's always human involvement, even if once that's done, the AI makes the decision end to end. There's always a human involvement in it. So I think we're going to learn a lot more about how best to use AI, where it fits better, where it doesn't. Privacy concerns around. I think there was a technology company where a developer needed some help building some code, so they uploaded their company's entire IP to ChatGPT, and now it's in the public domain. That's really easy to do, and it's really, really dangerous. So I think we're going to learn the guardrails as we go. I mean, you could probably, the cloud is going to get rid of everybody's data center. It hasn't. It's replaced a lot of them. It's enhanced a lot of them, but it hasn't actually replaced data centers, right? So I think, there's a little bit of conservative thinking there as well around how AI is going to change the world, if you like.
Understood. This has flown by, but I have to ask two final questions. The first one is, who's the best value seller you've ever worked with?
Yeah, it's really hard to pick one.
You can pick more.
As we alluded before, I mean, I think I learned a lot. One of the reasons I actually made that move from GE to Blade Logic was the value selling culture at Blade Logic really, really resonated with me as a sort of a scientific minded technical person. That sort of approach, very disciplined approach, made sense. So I'd say, obviously John McMahon jumps out as the person who's driven a lot of this, qualified sales leader. There's a lot of people who worked at the team at Blade Logic or otherwise, people like Carlos De La Torre, Dan Foucher,
Carlos was mentioned in the qualified sales leader, by the way.
He was. Okay. As Carlos or as a pseudonym?
I think Carlo.
Carlo. Oh, okay. So, I mean, anybody from that day, I'm still in touch with a lot of people I worked with at Blade Logic and certainly BMC. So there's a lot of really good value sellers out there.
And equally, from your peer group or mentors in the business value consulting or value engineering space, any ones that come to mind?
I think one of the first people I worked with, so when I was at BMC, I was not in the value consulting team. I was an SE and I worked with the value consulting team. So I learned a lot from folks like Doug May, Dave Moskowitz. They were the people probably closest to the area, to the region that I was in. And, since then, I actually worked for Dave at MongoDB. We'd been brought in to build the value practice there. And that was really the first value consulting role I was in. So obviously I learned a lot from Dave there. And so they're probably the folks that I would mention the most. Any value engineer that I've worked with, Brian Seglich came in at MongoDB as well. Honestly, Andre Montian, who works for me here at Sysdig, I've learned a ton from him as well because he's been in the field. I think it's I wouldn't say it's a new practice, but it's got so many aspects to it. I think you can learn something from pretty much anybody who's been doing it because their experience is going to be different to yours. And, that's why I love conversations like this, because, you ask a question a different way. You're like, oh, yeah, I hadn't thought of it like that. So,
same, which is what I've heard from you today. The way that you present information or the story was really fast. Look, we build business cases, right? My company Symbi is all about generating automated business cases and optimizing sales. And the way that you framed the business case, a really different perspective and a way to consider that a business case exists. You just need to find it, right? It's a brilliant, brilliant hypothesis.
Yeah.
I love it.
And
a really nice way to
as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking of all the people I didn't mention. So anybody who's connected to me on LinkedIn with a sales role, you, and anyone who's connected to me on LinkedIn in a value role, you as well. Okay, so I covered myself there.
We'll run a little script afterwards and just name everyone.
Use AI.
Brilliant. David, thank you very much. Really, really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, this is great. I appreciate the time, and thanks for having me on.